Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Jacobin Show. Jen is out this episode, but we are joined by David Griscom. And tonight we're going to be talking about socialism in music. We're really glad to have David on the show tonight. He is a musician himself, and he's the host of Left Reckoning and a dear friend of the Jacobin Show. Hi, David.
Hey, it's really fun to be here. I always like hanging out on the Jacobin streams.
Where's your banjo? Where's your guitar? Are you ready for
They're
this?
right in front of me right now.
Gonna be
I could bring them out in LA. Do a little show and tell.
Despite, the impulse to, we're not just going to promote our own bands or music. We're going to dig into some subjects around the history of socialism in music, the current state of unionism in music. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you, did you watch the Grammys last week, a little over last week?
No, I could not get myself to do it other than watching, Cardi B's performance obviously was a must watch, but no, I didn't catch it live.
What I like about the Grammys is that they always prompt the same kind of conversations around representation and women's sexual expression.
Yeah.
And
it's like an endless loop.
Yeah, exactly. That's the Groundhog Day of the Grammys. The other thing,
discourse, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's not just the Grammys. They're nested in a bigger set of everyone talking about those issues. So what did you think of Cardi B's performance?
I mean, I thought it's killer. I'm sorry. I'm a huge Cardi B stan. I hope that's not too normy of me, but I think she's incredible, and obviously I'm a big fan of the Stallion as well.
Yeah, well, Cardi's a Bernie bro, so that helps. Yeah, I think it's interesting how people are grappling with that platform as a way to kind of protest it. The Weeknd didn't submit anything for review because he didn't feel that people were being fairly represented. But there's so much more going on in the music industry and the conditions of it, which we'll dig into later. You did say you watched the Country Music Awards.
Well, that's something that's worth mentioning because I think most of the award shows, for the most part are, they're not very, very exciting things to watch, but the Country Music Awards are exceptional. In their just refusal to deal with anything that's happening in the world, right? And the most recent CMAs, they actually failed to honor or mention some very important musicians in country music who had passed away. One, John Prine, who they ignored because of his politics. I mean, John Prine was a radical. If people are interested, I do a lot on Ben Burgess's show, Give Them an Argument. A segment called Outlaws and Revolutionaries. We talk about the histories of these folks. Anyways, he was like a radical. They didn't talk about him, nor did they talk about Billy Joe Shaver. And the reason they didn't talk about Billy Joe Shaver is because he died of COVID, and talking about his death would be political, right? And I don't know if Kale has this up, but I think the best reaction was Sturgill Simpson's reaction to the CMAs, where he said, 2 seconds, that's all it would have took. Don't get it twisted. I wouldn't be caught dead at this tacky ass glitter and Botox cake and cock pony show, even if my chair had a morphine drip. I just wanted to see if they would say his name, but nope, no time for Buddha. And he's talking there about his good friend, John Prine. So anyways, if you think the Grammys are bad, I'm here to tell you that the Country Music Awards and that whole industry is way worse.
It's sad too, because there's such an incredible radical legacy with country. And you're going to get into that later. Before we get to your segment, which is great, and before we bring on our guest tonight, Jason Myles, himself a musician, also the host of This Is Revolution, I wanted to talk about labor, alienation, and exploitation. I had an idea, David, a long time ago. I don't have Twitter, which I say often on the show, but I wanted to make a Twitter account called Teaching Marx to Kanye that was just using Kanye's own lyrics to be like, you're really kind of getting at something about the labor theory of value here.
I love it. You should do that. No one has to know.
They'll know now.
Actually, I have to say the Jacobin Show probably, out of all the left YouTube shows, is probably the least on Twitter.
Yeah.
None of y'all are on that.
Well, Paul is.
Oh, Paul is, yeah.
Yeah, he takes all the heat for us.
That's good.
I'm not doing it as a political act or an act of self-preservation. I fundamentally don't understand how to do it. I know I seem like I'm young enough to like adjust, but I just can't. I don't get it. On that note, I want to get to my segment about the exploitation and alienation that people face within the music industry. The music industry is an odd combination of glamour, power, celebrity, and also exploitation through predatory contracts, coercion, and ownership. Like many types of media, while we celebrate the artists, the connection they give us to our emotions and imaginations, the conditions that produce their art are obscured by powerful and complex systems. There's an intimacy that a person feels with an artist they love, something that personalizes them. This can disguise some of the conditions of this industry, but artists have started to speak out. I'd like to take a moment to look at some high-profile examples, starting with Lauryn Hill, who issued this statement on why she withdrew from the industry. Quote, "Having put the lives and needs of other people before my own for multiple years, and having made hundreds of millions of dollars for certain institutions under complex and sometimes severe circumstances, I began to require growth and more equitable treatment, but was met with resistance. I entered into my craft full of optimism, which I still possess, but immediately saw the suppressive force with which the system attempts to maintain its control over a given paradigm. I've seen people promote addiction, use sabotage, blacklisting, media bullying, and other coercion techniques they could to prevent artists from knowing their true value or exercising their full power. These devices of control, no matter how well-intentioned or not, can have devastating outcomes on the lives of people, especially creative types who must grow and exist within a certain environment and according to a certain pace in order to live and create optimally." The statement is long, and many people focus on the more sensational aspects of this, particularly because it was released after Hill was charged with failing to file taxes. But far less people looked at the kinds of conditions it described, conditions that have time and again been at the center of musicians' issues with the industry, from session musicians to huge stars like Prince, Taylor Swift, and Lady Gaga. Now, full disclosure, I used to sing for Lauryn Hill, and I noticed that a lot of the criticism that she got was around measures she took to protect her independence and well-being as an artist. There are more people speaking up about this, and they're attracting less scrutiny than she did at the time. But she was one of the kind of early starters criticizing aspects of the industry, and she was roundly attacked for it. Luckily, that has changed in some ways, but the terrain on which the fight takes place has not. As strange as it may seem, the music industry, whether it knows it or not, has been one of the most vocal about workers controlling the means of production and the fruits of their labor. Part of this is tied to the commercialization of authenticity in the industry. The singer-songwriter who records and distributes their own songs, the mogul who makes it big and starts her own label to help other artists maintain their integrity, or more recently, the artist-owned streaming service. But beyond brand management and authenticity, there's a real critique of the lack of control musicians have over their own content and the conditions of their careers and working life. What they are alluding to are the classic Marxist concepts of exploitation and alienation, and technological change and financialization have exacerbated these tendencies in the industry. Let's listen to Taylor Swift.
Lately, there's been a new shift that has affected me personally and that I feel is a potentially harmful force in our industry. And as your resident loud person, I feel the need to bring it up. And that is the unregulated world of private equity coming in and buying up our music as if it is real estate, as if it's an app or a shoe line. This just happened to me without my approval, consultation, or consent. After I was denied the chance to purchase my music outright, my entire catalog was sold to Scooter Braun's Ithaca Holdings in a deal that I'm told was funded by the Soros family, 23 Capital, and the Carlyle Group. Yet, to this day, None of these investors have ever bothered to contact me or my team directly to perform their due diligence on their investment in me, to ask how I might feel about the new owner of my art, the music I wrote, the videos I created, photos of me, my handwriting, my album designs. And of course, Scooter never contacted me or my team to discuss it prior to the sale, or even when it was announced.
Now, the point here isn't to feel bad for Taylor Swift or any of these other extremely successful musicians. The point is that even at this level of success, you cannot effectively compete with or mitigate the interests of capital. You can be a global superstar, and you're still fighting for ownership over not just your products, but yourself and your identity. It's easier for huge stars to speak up about this because of their profiles, but it doesn't mean it's easier for them to fight it. Most recently, R&B legend Anita Baker has asked fans not to purchase or stream her music as she fights for ownership of her masters. Other artists are fighting individually for more revenue on streaming services, or like Jay-Z, trying to start their own with Tidal. But what has been missing from the discussion is unionization. That is, until recently.
Atlanta don't sound like they'd be down for this rapper strike thing I keep talking about.
Rapper strike? Who? Well, I ain't heard about that. Well, I must have missed that.
Why he don't sound like he fucking with the rapper strike?
I don't know.
You don't think we need a union? A union.
Man, you
should be you should be like our Derek Fisher or somebody. Come on, Chris Paul.
Yeah, I can be that. They gonna pay me to be the head of that.
I just like that 2 Chainz rotates out of frame for that. But here Joe Budden is talking to 2 Chainz about a rapper's strike over issues around racism in the US, similar to the one staged by the NBA. But other artists have talked about organizing, including Lady Gaga, who claimed in 2016, quote, "We don't have a union as artists. We're just fighting for ourselves." And you can see this in the tactics that they undertake. But the thing is, they do have a union. Musicians are represented by both SAG-AFTRA and AFM. Their membership is extremely limited, in part because the model in the music industry is so complex, with so many people working as freelance workers, and many musicians occupying the role of both boss and employee. The dynamic of the industry means people's roles can shift rapidly from one context to another. The other membership issue is that as the industry has changed, the unions have failed to connect to the issues faced by those working within it, not for lack of trying. Now it seems more viable for high-profile people, however, to start their own agencies, their own record labels, and make their own venues than to join in organizing the industry. But as Adam Krauthammer, president of AFM's New York chapter, told Rolling Stone, quote, "Income inequality and other issues in the workplace are never going to be addressed by individual musicians alone. Labor is the way forward." I would encourage anyone who's interested to check out that article and this article on Jacobin called "Musicians Can and Should Organize to Improve Their Working Conditions." It gets much more in depth into the conditions of the industry and the history of organizing within it than I can during this segment, but I would strongly encourage anybody who's interested in organizing in the music industry to check those out. One of the most profound and banal aspects of music is that people work together to create a collective expressive product, something shareable, relatable, and communal. Cooperation and emotion are at the heart of this art form. There is a reason why workers' choruses were celebrated as the artistic manifestation of the socialist impulse. The collective acting as an individual, greater than the sum of its parts, the might in the union of people. It is a living dictum, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. We focus a lot on the possibility of democratic socialism to alleviate and eliminate the brutality and deprivation so many people experience. but it also has the ability to increase connection, joy, and leisure. The music industry has a lesson about the failure of individual responses to collective problems. Often celebrities try to solve it by creating their own companies, using their individual might to push for changes at the margins, or to push for changes within their own contracts. And we should pay attention to these failures because so often the solution that is offered by capitalism mimics the strategies undertaken by the most famous musicians. Don't like the game? Change the players. Jay-Z's Tidal or Taylor Swift's Spotify deal won't change the conditions for the vast majority of musicians whose work is precarious, pay unpredictable, and contracts inscrutable and predatory. Most can't withdraw like Lauryn Hill understandably did, but even those on top are stronger when they work with those on the bottom. Imagine for a second if Anita Baker didn't just have the fans on her side, but every session musician, songwriter, and producer, and seasoned union lawyers to help her fight for her masters. I want to end with this clip from WGA member Howard Gould in the lead up to the writer's strike. The WGA was facing a similar situation as musicians. Technological changes and how people consume their products changed the revenue model, and the writers were left out of this. Here's Gould explaining the stakes of the strike and the power of the union.
Just a personal experience last night. I went on NBC.com, clicked on The Office. You can watch entire episodes of 10, 15 series. Okay? You click on The Office, what do you get? You get a commercial for Fidelity Investments. Then you watch the cold open, and then you get a commercial for Target. They are monetizing these episodes already. Okay? Carlton Hughes was telling me before, Lost does not run a second network rerun. So the writers on that show are not getting the typical nice check that you usually get when you're working on a successful series. That goes right to the internet. They're making money on it. We're not making money on those. We must realize that that's the kind of issue we can't let stand. As the internet becomes it's the way my kids watch TV. They hear about a show, they look for it on the internet. Soon, when computers and your TV are connected, that's how we're all going to watch. Okay? Those residuals are going to go from what they are towards zero if we don't make a stand now. And I want to go a step beyond that, which is this is such a big issue that if they see us roll over on this without making a stand, 3 years from now, they're going to be back for something else. Okay? And I'm gonna tell you something. And these guys will tell you, I might have been the most moderate one up here when we started. But I sat there in the room the first day, and they read us those 32 pages of rollbacks. And what they wanted us to hear was that if you don't give us what you want on the important thing, we're going to come after you for all those other things. But what I heard was, if we give them that thing, they'll still come after us for those other things. And in 3 years, it'll be, we want to revamp the whole residual system. And in another 3 years, it'll be, you know what, we don't really want to fund the health fund the way we've been. And then it'll be pension, and then it'll be credit determination. And there just is that time when everybody has to see this is one where we've just got to stand our ground. That's it.
So I hope Taylor Swift listens to Howard Gould. We can stand our ground, but we can cover a lot more of it collectively.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's so true to see like what is coming for folks in the music industry is coming for creatives across the board, right? Mm-hmm. And how critical, because this is something that we're talking about not just with regards to like music and art, but also with medicine, intellectual property. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting to see who that system benefits today. Right. And it's primarily been those at the very, very, very top of the system, while so many of the people who do the actual work of producing all the things that, we need and make life worth living. Get screwed over even at the top echelons. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's the same in other industries like coders, for instance. They're producing intellectual property. These things are worth, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. And they don't receive residuals that I know of on the code that they're creating. The model that the Writers Guild has put in place I think is a good roadmap or a blueprint for other industries where it could be applied. And the music industry is interesting because, like you said, you've got these huge profile stars who are just being completely, run down by a system that's set up to protect capital.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
On that note,
Yeah.
let's get to some of the more authentic musicians.
Well,
I like that music has I know I could go into the postmodern theories on authenticity and identity and so on and so forth, but that's what makes a lot of music political. That's what allows some people to inject their politics into their music, and people really like to be able to connect with people on that level. I think your segment gets to a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah, I'm going to be talking about, I decided to highlight some big names, people that everybody knows, to make the same point that I'm going to be talking about 3 members of the Highwaymen, which is, one of the greatest country and just in general supergroups of all time, Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson. No disrespect to Waylon Jennings, my personal favorite, but these just fit really well. But, I could also be talking about other artists like Blaze Foley or Townes Van Zandt, right? You might know who Townes Van Zandt is, but he spent a life, even though he wrote music that was covered by everybody. He was one of the most influential musicians probably of all time in the United States. Somebody who really struggled financially because he was constantly getting screwed over by this system, this capital system, which rewarded extremely predatory and also highly monopolized record and music industry, right? So I wanted to focus on these folks too, and also give a little bit of a defense for country music, or an argument for country music, because country music is extremely personal to me. It's been the music in the backdrop of my life. It makes me think of home and family and all these things, and I get very angry when I see the state of country music today. Because what we saw happening in the golden era of country music, right, where you have these outlaw stars like Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson fighting against the record industry and really pushing a different kind of music. What we're living through today is a period of time where those record executives and capital in general has won out. And the people who get the most money in country music aren't making the best music, and they're also think about what happened after 9/11, all of those terrible country songs, supporting the Iraq War, when that wasn't the history of country music. And I think it's really important for fans of it to try to reclaim it today. But let's get into Johnny Cash for a second. We all know Johnny Cash as a rebel, right? The man in black, somebody who seemed to have a lot of fun, drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff. But let's not forget where he came from. If we have this first clip up here, Cale, Johnny Cash came from Dyce, Arkansas.
There was nobody rich when it came to Dyce. Everybody was in the same boat. They didn't have no money, no nothing. They came here, they were poor as you could be. They were just trying to make a living to feed their family, and this was a new beginning.
Before 1934, Dyce Colony was non-existent. It was a cypress swamp, and it flooded frequently. And as part of the Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal administration, the federal government purchased the land from adjacent landowners, drained parts of it, and built a new community, a new town that offered relief and economic opportunity for farm families across Arkansas that were affected by the Depression.
And it's an amazing story right here. Johnny Cash comes from that town. Johnny Cash was a product of the New Deal, was a product of social programs. And despite how many conservatives try to own Johnny Cash and country music, Johnny Cash would describe his early life as this: I grew up under socialism, kind of. Maybe a better word would be communalism, right? Johnny Cash had this radical upbringing that came out of the labor militancy that was able to push through so many of the best programs of the New Deal. And let's not forget, we all know the story of Johnny Cash. He spent a long time fighting to get into the music industry. Remember, it took a lot for him to really get a serious listen from the folks who basically owned access to the radio waves. But of course, we all know Johnny Cash is a household name. He became an extremely influential musician who changed the face of country music and music in this country in general, right? But he spent his entire time having to fight against a music industry that tended to be extremely conservative, not just politically, but also musically, an industry that was very resistant to change. And I just want you to remember this, that these things are about power at the end of the day. From the previous segment, we were talking about how artists are trying to fight to have control over their own music. It's been the case from the beginning. And the reason for that is that capitalism allows a few people to exert incredible amounts of power over all of us, even if you're a big star. Music is no different. But let's talk a little bit about Johnny Cash's life and this kind of radical tradition. You know, folks might know this, but, you know, Johnny Cash actually played for Richard Nixon. And it's a very interesting story because Johnny Cash is invited to go play for Richard Nixon, you know, in the middle of this brutal war. And Richard Nixon requests that he plays Okie from Muskogee. For folks who aren't familiar with that, it's a satirical song written by Merle Haggard, basically about beating up hippies who are anti-war, right? Funny story, by the way, when Johnny Cash played his famous concert in San Quentin Prison, Merle Haggard was in that audience. Anyway, Johnny Cash declines Richard Nixon's request and says, "I've got a few of my own to play for you." The first song he played was the Ballad of Ira Hayes. Ira Hayes was one of the American soldiers and a Native American who ended up holding the flag at the Battle of Iwo Jima, that famous photograph. He wrote this song is about how he came back from the war and was mistreated by the government and the system. Some of the lyrics go, "Down the ditches 1,000 years, the waters grew Irish people's crops, till the white man stole their water rights and the sparkling water stopped." Then Johnny Cash went on to play "What is Truth," which was an anti-Vietnam song and called out was basically calling on the ruling class of the society to have some humanity and to listen seriously to the questions that were being brought up by the young folks in the society. And the last song he played was "Man in Black." And for folks who aren't familiar with that song, that's Johnny Cash describing why he wears his signature black. And it's not just a stylistic choice. He wears it for the poor and beaten down, living in the hopeless, hungry side of town. He wears it for the prisoner who has paid for his crime, but is there because he's a victim of the time. Johnny Cash was through and through a radical. And if you think that art can change anyone, that is quite an opportunity to play for somebody as insane and monstrous as Richard Nixon and to play those kind of songs. And one last thing about Johnny Cash and his music, I think, and I propose here, a song that needs to become a mainstay in left organizing spaces is "Oni," which is a ballad that Johnny Cash wrote about a worker who was waiting for the whistle at the end of his last day at the job after spending his entire life working for somebody else, because once that whistle blows, he's going to punch his boss in the face. He dedicates the song to the working man. For every man that puts in 8 or 10 hard hours a day of work, toil, and sweat, always got somebody looking down his neck, trying to get more out of him than he really ought to have put in. I bring this up to just compare it to what you're going to hear on, popular country radio stations today. Nothing as radical as this, but that's the tradition of country music. And before we move on from Johnny Cash, I also just want to throw this one out here because it's a great clip from Johnny Cash, who actually was in the miniseries North and South. And when he knew that this was going on, he specifically demanded to play the radical abolitionist John Brown.
These are members of my staff. You talk as though we're at war, sir. We most certainly are at war. My men and I came all the way from Kansas to make sure justice prevails and to ensure the freedom of Negroes in this state.
I love that clip, one, because it's great to see Johnny Cash as John Brown, but also because Patrick Swayze has a terrible Southern accent, and Johnny Cash just cannot, hold back his own twang. But let's talk about Willie Nelson for a second, too, because this is another person who we all know, because of his, love of weed. Willie Nelson is obviously an incredible human being, an incredible musician, but this is another person too who had to spend the early parts of his career fighting against a record industry which refused to let him play music his own way. And it's just something that you have to think about. One, these are labor issues, but man, it's such a horrible crime to think about how many other people were not allowed to basically present their music to the world because a bunch of wealthy people who control basically access to music production, prevent visionaries and artists from being able to make music. He had to leave Nashville, come to Austin, where there was a much more laid back hippie scene, to be able to become the Willie Nelson that we all know and love today. But I wanted to focus on one aspect of Willie Nelson's advocacy that a lot of folks miss out on. Willie Nelson has been a long-time supporter of Leonard Peltier. I believe we have a couple photographs of Leonard too. For folks who aren't familiar, Leonard Peltier was a member of the American Indian Movement who was framed for murder of 2 FBI agents and is still in prison today, an American political prisoner. Willie Nelson constantly would do benefit concerts in support of Leonard Peltier and for Leonard Peltier's freedom. We have this one right here, Cowboys for Indians and Justice for Leonard Peltier. Willie Nelson would do these concerts so frequently that the police, to this day, will show up at his concerts in protest. And we have this last LA Times article on this as well. Benefit concert for convicted killer haunts Willie Nelson, right? That's from 1988. But basically, from Boston, all across the country, police unions will show up at Willie Nelson's concerts to demand that he apologize for supporting Leonard Peltier. He still stands with Leonard, right? And this is one of those things that gets completely overshadowed on purpose by a music industry that wants to hide how radical and progressive these folks were. Just while we're on Leonard Peltier and music, Stephen Van Zandt, who you might know from either Bruce Springsteen or from The Sopranos, also is an outspoken supporter of Leonard Peltier too. And I highly suggest you check out some of the songs that he's written about Leonard Peltier. They are very, very goofy. But last but not least, I wanted to talk about Chris Christopherson, who is also a member of the Highwaymen. And he was somebody who was an incredible poet and writer and thinker, and he's a musician that you really should dive into if you're not familiar. But he's somebody who too had to fight to get into the record industry, and they would constantly, even when he became a big star, would tell him that he could not sing the songs about the things that he wanted to sing about, or they would try to censor his music, right? And that's because he was an outspoken critic of U.S. imperialism, not just the war in Vietnam, but he was a supporter of the Sandinistas. And he was obviously an outspoken critic of the war in Iraq. And he had to spend his career, even though he was one of the most famous artists out there, constantly having contracts pulled out from underneath his feet because record companies didn't want somebody who was talking about truth and justice. And we have this last little clip here about him talking about censorship in music.
The reason that the music didn't have an effect on the war in Iraq was not that we stopped making the music, was that they stopped playing it. I think the people behind the censorship, I know ultimately it may be people in the government, but I think directly it's people who are affected economically by it, who feel that their product won't sell. I know that was the first excuse that was given to me. They said I had become unmarketable because I was writing songs like They Killed Him, which was about Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and they said that I simply was unmarketable in what they perceived as my market.
And that's exactly it. I mean, Chris really lays out the dynamic there is people who have economic interests in making sure that certain messages are not allowed to reach the general public. And this, again, is somebody who is one of the most legendary and celebrated country music artists ever, who is having his own work be censored. I think, it's something that's not unique to country music, but it's something that I think we should be more and more up in arms about, because, people oftentimes say, like, oh, I miss the golden era of country music when people wrote, great songs and stood up for social causes. That still exists today. The problem is that the record companies have been able to win that fight, that they are able to prevent anybody from getting big and famous who is not going to toe the line. There are exceptions, and that's a good thing. But what we're seeing in country music right now is not that the music itself or the style of music or the idea or the history of it, is conservative or like necessarily like needs to make the kind of terrible music that you're hearing today. It's actually happened because there is a deliberate choice by those at the top to make sure that this music is bleached of any kind of radical message, pro-worker message that is its roots and its history.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And the way that he talks about the kind of overlapping interests, sometimes it's political, sometimes it's economic. We've seen this more too with people talking about Nina Simone's life, everything that she went through, which is just absolutely heartbreaking and brutal for her political messages. And I like your point that it's not that the music is changing, it's that who you're hearing is changing.
I think that's
Remember that "We'll Put a Boot in Your Ass" song.
Toby Keith is a real jackass. There's a funny story about Toby Keith and Chris Christopherson to tell maybe later.
Yeah, we should do that. We should bring in Jason for that. We are really, really happy to welcome Jason Myles onto the show. He's the host of This Is Revolution and the singer and guitar player for Bitter Lake. He has a longer CV that I hope he gets into about his musical development. We're going to keep this like more conversational
Awesome.
because there's so many things to touch on. I mean, this is a huge topic. David and I have brought up some things. I want to talk about the way technology is changing musicians.
And that's very, very near and dear to my heart because I didn't get a chance to really explain it to Cale. I've talked to him a little bit about it, but over the last 10 years or so before the world shut down, I pretty much spent my life traveling around the world, playing probably about 100, 150 shows a year. And also working, I used to work contracted through an extremely large tech company. So I worked all the very large music festivals. So, David, I'm sure you know Stagecoach. Stagecoach, Coachella, EDC. So music is literally my life. And then I finally moved out of there earlier this year. I lived inside of a music rehearsal recording studio in West Oakland, where if you're familiar with the movie Sorry to Bother You, a lot of that was filmed there. Everybody's video was filmed there. It's not glamorous. It wasn't like a hippie artist commune. It was, it was kind of a hood ass.
It's never as glamorous as you think.
No.
And not every place is a drug den, but
it was this one. It's totally fine. It's totally fine.
So you moved.
I finally. It was a long time coming, but it enabled me to meet a lot of people. I got to meet all my heroes, like through that place. That's actually how I know Boots Riley and so many other people. This shirt is not ironic. I'm a fan of the music, and all those guys practice there as well as.
Oh, cool.
We had the platinum records on the wall of like In Vogue and the Tonys, Tony, and then I got to meet them and know them. So that was pretty cool. Digital Underground. E40, Too Short, like I said, name a genre of music and somebody came through there. So it was from big acts, like when The Cure came there to practice, and there's another funny story there about The Cure and Smash Mouth if you guys care to hear it, to everybody that wants to be a superstar coming through. We deal with it all. So when I hear certain people talk about streaming and the money they get from streaming, it always rubs me a certain way, because for us very small artists, we never really made money from the radio anyway. And a big reason why you're hearing so many extremely large artists talk about streaming is because they're not getting those radio checks like they used to. If you would have saw the size of some of those radio checks, there's a reason why tours were so different in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. You start to see that cutoff because record sales really drop off. And again, being in that environment, you're literally with these cats
Mhm.
that are having these conversations, and you're hearing about the changes that they have to make from their live setup to doing things like meet and greets. Like
Mhm.
these artists are pretty much forced into doing meet and greets because everything is different, even down to the money they would get from endorsing instruments.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah, the model changed really drastically in a pretty, condensed period of time. And it's interesting because in some ways it's been good. I was reading that in 2017, the share of streaming revenue for indie artists was 47%. And it was much, much lower before that. So they're getting an increased share. A lot of things have been developed to try to, give people control over their platform. I know Bandcamp allows musicians to sell their own music. I know somebody who developed that. Yeah, he was my sister's friend. And it's interesting because you can have these almost vulgar Marxist conversations about the means of production, access to the means of production, control of the means of production, while at the same time, these technological changes are actually replacing a lot of people. You may not need a type of backup singer if you can auto-tune, or you may not need production models are changing. So the tension is always part of the conversation, I think, with musicians.
Yeah, yes and no. I'll say this. There is an odd shift to people wanting to be DJs, and that goes into, and this is just my opinion, there's no solid data I have on this, that goes into the amount of money you can make by yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And for some people, so for example, let's say, I hate to use real people's names, let's say I'm Trent Reznor.
You can change their okay.
Right? I don't know him. Fuck him. I don't know him. He might be a nice guy. I don't know. Seems like a nice guy. Let's say I'm Trent Reznor. I can go DJ at a club, and just for the fact that I'm there pressing shuffle on my iTunes, you got to pay me 6 figures. I don't have the production costs I had before. I have to pay a crew and all that other stuff. Doing that all day long. So that's why you see a lot of like bigger, but was it Paris Hilton as a DJ? Sure. You'd be surprised how much money these people make. Working festivals like EDC, which is the largest in North America. I think it's about 175,000 people a day.
Yeah.
For 3 days in the desert. And I wish I could have shared stuff with you so you could see the pictures, because it takes me like an hour and a half to get to my office when I'm there. Just to walk through it's a rave. It's a huge rave. And when you go to like Coachella and all these other music festivals, I don't care what the genre of music is, stages are spaced apart because you don't want bleed. They don't care. It's all night. It makes ridiculous amounts of money. Ridiculous. That's my job to do those reports. So I see why there's a shift in that for a lot of people to want to be DJs, because it is a little bit easier, and like you said, the technology has changed. But then when you see rappers, especially older ones, there tends to be a shift for them to actually want live musicians, because they need to change the show. They, those old gray mares ain't what they used to be. They can't, hop around on stage like they used to, right? So a live band takes up a lot of that space. It's a better show. But all that stuff costs money.
And this is like one of the things that's interesting, and I have much less experience with like actually like making music, in any kind of professional setting like that y'all do. But I think one of the tensions when it comes to streaming and when it comes to these shifts is fundamentally questions about power and our relationships to technology. Like, what do I mean by that? Like, it's actually not like the fact that I can, like, on my phone pick up and listen to almost like any great musician's like whole catalog is not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is that they're not getting the money, right? And and then we get into this absurd situation where we're trying to talk about a problem of like power relations and capitalism, right? But we instead start focusing our energy and frustration on technology, right?
Well, I'll tell you guys a true story about Paul McCartney, and I think I might have told this to you, Mr. Griscom. So there was a festival a few years back called Desert Trip. You young people called it Oldchella. And it happens where Coachella is. And if you remember it was like the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, The Who, Roger Waters, Bob Dylan. First time all those guys ever shared a stage. Right? So Coachella is about 125,000 people a day. This was in the 60s, like 60-some thousand people a day. That's a lot of people to see 6 bands, right? 2 bands a night. Where Coachella is music from 11 a.m. to whenever it's over. This is music from like 6 to 9. And then it's done, right? So to have those people there shit all day, because you're locked in. It's a little city. But you're pretty much locked in, and it's a consumer paradise. I'm trying to set so you really understand where all this stuff exists. So my job is to make sure the flow of capital doesn't stop. So I got to go check all the points of sale systems. I think we had about 900. About 900 points for one music festival, right? Coachella has about 1,400. Watch me get in all this trouble now. They get a message from Square.
Yeah, they're going to be like, why are you
you sue me. You're just practicing. I have no money. So I'm with this young kid that's assisting me in setting all this stuff up. We're just trying to make sure it's connected to the Wi-Fi. There's definitely several towers. They set up towers, so each section has its own freaking tower, right? We can't stop the flow of money. So as we're going around, Paul McCartney sound checking, because we're at the bar by the main stage. And the kid I'm with goes, "Is that Paul McCartney?" I was like, "I don't fucking know." Because I'm like an old man. I don't care what the music I hear in the background. I'm just like, let's get out of here. And it's hot. It's the desert. It's hot. And so the kid goes, "I think that's Paul McCartney. My dad likes Paul McCartney. I'm going to go record it." I was like, "I don't care." So the kid goes, walks off, and he's recording Paul McCartney. All of a sudden, security, we have all these like dune buggies or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, with their helicopters coming in, being like,
the alarms are going
the
off,
helicopters only for the rich people, right? They actually fly in. That's not a joke. You hear helicopters like Thursday and Friday. That is real. But they come in with the dune buggies, right? Zoom. Put your camera down. And one of the higher ups from the company I work at, takes the kid aside, puts him in the cart, takes him to me. He's got to erase his phone. They're like, Paul McCartney doesn't allow anyone to record his sound check. It is $3,000 a song if you want to watch his sound check.
Insane.
Yeah,
now,
that's
I don't know
level.
if Paul McCartney knows that somebody went out there to do that. We didn't hear Paul McCartney from the microphone say, "Hey, get that kid." He didn't motion.
Yeah, I'm sure he has a team of people that are, keeping their eye on things. No musician also. The other thing that's interesting about music is like, we have this perception that it's kind of this authentic, intimate representation of an individual or a set of individuals, but it's always a team of people. One of the interesting things about having these conversations is that even when artists themselves are talking about these issues, they have to start talking about and acknowledging their team. So like Beyonce is like at least 50 people, you couldn't be Beyonce and not have that whole team of people. That doesn't detract from what she does, but the way that she's related to is as an individual, and the tension between being like the product yourself and then producing a product with a team of people and then negotiating around those terms and then operating in a power structure where, let's face it, like capital has a tremendous amount of control. They can control your music for 35 years or longer. Yeah. So it creates all of these like really, really kind of interesting points of entry for some broader philosophical questions around socialism. Before we get to more of those, I wanted to roll a clip that I pulled that I actually found out about from Micah Utrecht's article on Jacobin called The Welfare State They Were In. And it's about the band Belle and Sebastian, and he talks about a Pitchfork documentary called If You're Feeling Sinister, where the members of the band are talking about a Scottish welfare program that they participated called Beatbox that was specifically for unemployed musicians. So, Cale, could you roll that clip for me?
I didn't actually move to Glasgow till I was in my 20s. I was unemployed, just doing music for a long time and couldn't really afford it. And it was when I started doing a course called Beatbox for unemployed musicians in Glasgow. You got an extra £10 a week, and that was enough to be able to rent a place. And that was where I met Stuart. He was on the course at the same time.
Beatbox was like a course that they put people on when they were either unemployed or, in my case, too sick to work. And they kind of gathered up all the waifs and strays from the town, and they said, okay, you're on a music course now.
But really we would just turn up, and there wasn't really a course provided for us. We were just sitting around, sort of like a refugee camp for unemployed musicians.
At first I thought it was terrible. I thought the type of music that they were playing was terrible. But after a while I realised this was the only game in town, that I should use it.
Maybe once a month your band were allowed to go in and record in the studio, and you could use other musicians for on the course.
And Stuart wasn't a bass player, but he said he would learn, he said my songs were so simple that he would play bass.
His style was quite well developed. I think I told him on that first day that it sounded a bit like Blur, which I think probably offended him.
So what I love about that is, it's a different type of social welfare program than we're used to seeing, especially in America. Mm-hmm. It's about developing the arts, developing artists, specifically helping people who are ill or who are unemployed access the space and the resources and the money and time to invest in music. And I think that you can see this in moments in American music history. For instance, the book Please Kill Me. It's about the development of the Stooges and post-industrial Detroit. Despite the fact that they're kind of commenting on this economic wasteland or extremely precarious world that people are going into as young people, it gives them the time and the space, right? It's cheap rent is what made New York music scene. So much of that has fostered music across the country. And I think that the socialist take could be to embrace some of that, to fund some of that, to make sure people have that space. So I wanted to see if you guys wanted to weigh in on that. David, would you like to go for a little bit?
Yeah,
and then we'll go to Myles, or we'll go to Jason. Sorry.
No, I mean it's definitely true. I mean, it's funny, like the creative process, you have like two sides of the spectrum, right? Where it's like you get the social welfare programs, right, which is better because they're giving people money and that is able to help them do the work. Or you have the other side where it's like if rents are really cheap and you can get a bunch of people in a small space, then you have the opportunity.
Or you can be and live in a warehouse or something.
Yeah, or like whatever kind of strange, and incredible and funny living situation that so many artists found themselves in. It was incredibly important to music, and it's something that I worry about a lot. Like I'm from Austin. I'm in Austin. It's a town that has a great music history. History I was talking about earlier with like Willie Nelson had to come to Austin really to become Willie Nelson because he couldn't make his music anywhere else. And a big part of that was there's a lot of people here making music together, but it was because it was cheap as hell. Right. Yeah. And you could get by. And if you could play a song, play a show every, a week or, on the weekend or something like that, you could have enough money to get food and whatever. You're not living a nice life, but you can get by. And that, fed into so much of the creativity of the city. Now, to be a working musician in Austin, and I just mean like, a regular person who's just playing music, it's really, really difficult. And more and more people.
A lot of stuff shut down in Austin, though, too. I mean, there used to be so many clubs. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I did want to bring up the fact that you were talking about gentrification the other night on Left Reckoning. I was trying to check some of that out. And I kind of enjoy when you talk about Austin because I think my first time in Austin might have been like 2011, 2012 playing a show. It definitely wasn't a good show. Austin, I hated it at first. Actually, it reminded me of LA. I used to say like F Austin all that. I used to hate it so much. My hatred for Austin ran deep for a long time. But as I kept going there, I would see that the places that I played the year before, sometimes even months before, had shut down. And even these historic places that have been there for decades were shutting down because you had a new movement of tech people coming in that didn't really care about the culture, right?
They didn't care, and they don't, and that's a huge problem. And then you also started to get this difficult part too, where because there was like, people really don't want to pay for music. It started to become really difficult to be able to book acts. Like I know some other Texas musicians who have told me straight up, like, I'm just not going to go and play in Austin because most of those places will either pay you like an extremely insulting amount of money, or basically say just do it for free. The classic, oh, you'll get exposure because it's the big city, it's big on, it's awesome.
Yeah,
I
played a show in Austin, and it was for a tech billionaire.
Jesus Christ.
For his birthday. It wasn't me personally. I wasn't headlining it. I was just backup singing for it. And yeah, it was, I think like the local police department was there doing security for him. You could see the divide. It was very, very clear, like what part of Austin he lived in and what part of Austin everybody else lived in.
And yeah, exactly. Like that's a whole other thing we can get into, like Austin's gentrification and wealth divide. But like the point here when it comes to music is like these things are social like goods, right? Like one of the things that I loved so much growing up was I would walk down the street even as a kid, and you were just hearing music, right? Like that. My mom did not listen to music at all. Right. So I didn't grow up in a musical household, but I was constantly hearing music. So I very much had that experience of, being around music all the time. And it's not as much the case today. And that's because there are shifts in like capitalism and culture and all that other stuff. But two, it's something that we could very much address if we were providing artists, not just musicians too, but artists in general with the funds, or hell, like, I think it'd be great if the government gave people social programs to help them out. But if we just made sure that people were able to access a basic standard of living in their homes and their communities, things would be way better.
So our neighbors to the north in Canada, we have some friends that we met on this last tour we did. The last tour I did was in 2019. Actually, the last show I played, Big D, was in Austin.
It was pre-COVID.
It was pre-COVID. Everything got canceled.
Show.
Yeah, everything got canceled for COVID. But the last show I played was in Austin. But anyway, some friends of ours in Canada, they own a small venue in Toronto. Were coming into town, and they said, "Jason, can you hook us up a show?" And I was like, "I can try," but they played more like it just wasn't. I play like punky metal shit, and they didn't play punky metal shit. And it's like all my friends are in punky metal shit bands, or I know really mediocre young hip hop guys. I'm like, I don't want to put you with mediocre young hip hop guys. I want to get you guys a legit show, but I can't just call In Vogue up and be like, "Hey, are y'all playing the Cow Palace?" So I was like, we'll do a show, because also where I lived, there was a stage room. I should have sent Kayla a link to the place so I could have showed you. So the stage room was actually built to be a club. But it's just where you can do practice before a show. Definitely, like I said, a bunch of videos are shot there. So I was like, we'll throw a show in the stage room, and we'll do an old school house show style. And I had invited a friend of mine that's a comedian that opens for Chappelle, and it was dope. He had a live band, it was dope. And I went to give them money at the end of the night, and they were like, "We're fine. We get a stipend from the government to go on tour." Thousands. To go on tour.
Yeah. And
Well,
Toronto's
they're
an
just trying to keep up
expensive
with
city
us.
too. Toronto's not immune from some of these things, but you see how these, basic programs and access completely change stuff for people. Jason, you said that you lived in this kind of rehearsal space. I wanted to ask you more about the way that musicians often share these things with each other. There's this kind of unspoken. Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think despite the kind of competitiveness in the industry, there's also this like really nice comradely favoritism that can happen sometimes too.
So
did you see this? Did you let people in?
So first of all, to get in the place, not a lot of people live there. The owner has to okay you, and the owner is like an old school stoner that's only done this type of work his entire life, and he's in his late 50s. and he has an oh well fuck it attitude that you have to admire. It's so rock and roll, you have to admire it. When Digital Underground told him in the early 90s, you shouldn't do Tupac's album release party because there's going to be real killers there, and he's like, oh no, fuck it, man, it's rock and roll, have a party. And it went off without a hitch. And that's been kind of his, you know, is his MO. So there was always wild shit going on, like wild shit. And you couldn't complain about it.
Yeah.
So I lived in a part where I was the only person that lived there, but it was next to like his office. So we called it like the hidden side. You can't really see it from the street. But one of my neighbors who passed away not too long ago liked to do crazy shit, and at 3 o'clock in the morning turn everything up to 11 and play for 20 minutes. I can't go knock on his door and be like, turn that shit down, because I may want to record a song. But because of that sort of weird camaraderie in this odd space, what I was able to get was an amount of help that I never would have gotten had I not lived there. So one day, my ex and I were in a group for about 7 years, and we were rehearsing one day, and Dwayne Wiggins walked in from Tony, and he said, first he apologized, and then we were like, oh no, that's fine. Like, we knew who he was, and he goes, you guys are really interesting, and I think you need a video done. And we're like, that, yeah, we don't have any fucking money. And he goes, well, I'll call my video guy. We're like, but you're Dwayne Wiggins. Your video guy is not my video guy. Come on,
not anymore.
Well, yeah, he takes us out for pizza. He calls up this guy. This white man shows up, and he's like, so where are the people at? And he goes, these are the guys. And so he whispers something to the dude, and the dude looks at us. He goes, well, how much can you afford? We're like, $100. That's all we had. And he shot all day with us, with steady cams and lights and all kind of crazy shit. You can't get that anywhere else but that place. I got to know one of my favorite bands is Faith No More. I got to know Faith No More pretty well. I remember our microphone broke while we were recording an album, and their bass player Billy Gould always said, if you need anything, ask me. Whatever you need, ask me. So I go knock on the door. They're rehearsing to go on a tour to Japan, and I'm knocking on the door, and he's like, yeah, what's up? I was like, our microphone broke. And he goes into the booth and he screws it off. He's like, here you go, we're going to Japan. Just keep it and give it back to me when you see me again. Like that level of support, I could only get there. And then also, like I said, getting to know all of your heroes and having them support you, do shows with you, give you tips, give you gear. I have so much gear from these people.
Yeah, there's tons of like interpersonal solidarity and, assistance and stuff, I think, with musicians. And I want to see it channeled into a union. I want to help Anita Baker beyond just not streaming her music, but I'd pick it for her. I would lay down my time for Anita Baker.
but it is interesting, right? Because of course I want to see something more fair, but there's definitely tiers of these artists, and it's interesting when you see people trying to come up and all the things that they have to do. Teray and I talk about this all the time when we talk about like why Black kids don't play rock music or even play funk music really anymore. And first of all, it's access to instruments.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that, like, because I play only acoustic instruments primarily, and I was like, man, that's expensive. Every time I think about like jumping into electric guitar, I'm like, okay, this is like $3,000 that I don't have, so I'm just gonna keep playing old school.
Yeah, in New Orleans just destroyed its public school system, like more thoroughly than any other place, but they could not take instruments away from those kids. If you are a kid in New Orleans, you get a free instrument. You can walk around New Orleans. That's where my husband's family is from, and a lot of them work in the music industry. And there's just little kids out, right? Like playing the trumpet, playing the tuba. It's a city of music. It's infused with it. Part of it is because you know, well, for a while it was relatively cheap, right, for musicians to get spaces there, but they pour a lot into that industry. They pour a lot into those venues.
It's also in the
and they
culture.
give kids, yeah, exactly, because like that's a third rail. You cannot take that access away from those kids. We need more of that. A commenter asked us a question about a push to revive the federal arts program, which was a New Deal program running from 1935 to 1943 to fund the visual arts in the United States. I think it should just be expanded. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. What do you guys think of that? Jason, would you like to weigh in here?
Man, that reminds me again of Canada with these grants that people get and the funding that people get to go do their thing. That program was also weren't they doing things like they were getting hired to do certain things? It wasn't just like okay, go
commissioned for
Jason, go make weird arty loud shit in a like it.
Yeah, they didn't just give you the keys to a studio.
Like me, but I would definitely love to see something like that. Even in New Orleans, artists get housing. You can get housing if you qualify. If you
and there's artist housing in New York City and some other cities in the U.S.
And we don't fund the arts because we don't really respect music. Like how many school programs have cut their music programs? When you watch an old documentary about like a funk band, and I definitely got to meet a lot of the old funk bands, because a lot of that shit happened in the Bay Area. Those guys all met in like junior high and high school playing in a band. In a school band.
I think that's like such a good point. It's like one, like obviously most people listening to this know that us all, as socialists are going to say we want the government to be supporting artists, right, and putting that money into schools, and things of that nature. But it's also something that's worth noting. It's like socialism is about community and being social. And what we've seen with music, I don't have some like big theory about it, but it's just something that I think about a lot, is how music has become very, very individual, like as an experience. You listen alone, you might go to a concert, but you have your group of people who like your type of music. And instead of it being something that was, a community experience, right? Or like a regional experience. It's funny when you read, and by the way, too, this isn't some kind of thing. It's like, as much as I like it, like if you live in the South, you have to only listen to country music, right? No, literally, like some of the great folks out there. I mean, I think about something like a jukebox, right? You come into a public space, right, to hear music, and somebody's going to select it, and they might be playing jazz or class or whatever, right? All different kinds of music, but it was something that was shared with a lot of different folks, which allowed people to enjoy music as a community experience rather than just like, this is my identity. I dress this way, so I'm only going to listen to this kind of thing, right? And I see this like with like our kind of like hyper individualistic culture in the U.S. in particular. It's something that's very harmful to like creativity and to community, that we really have segmented things in that way.
Yeah, it's the logic of commodities, right? Like you have a bracketed product, you have a bracketed genre, you have a bracketed kind of self. The thing that's incredible about music, I'll never forget being in junior high school, and I was in choir, and I tried out for a state choir. And, Maine is so boring, you guys, where I grew up. But I loved my music teacher. I will never forget him to this day. I still go and visit him. I love him. Those people affect you so much. Those experiences do. And I'll never forget being part of this like 150 person choir, and you can feel the sound. And it's the same when you play in a funk band. I played in a funk band for a long time. When you're literally, your body is vibrating. Your pulse is part of the instruments around you. You're sharing the emotions of other people. These things are part of the kind of socialist ideology, the things that underpin social democratic impulses, the ability to create collectively, the ability to have force collectively. It's why the workers' choruses were so important. It's why, you strike fear into the slave owner and the exploitative boss alike by marching together and singing the same song. It's what protest is, you know? I think we're missing a lot of that. And it's sad to me, while it's understandable to see these big celebrities pursuing these kind of individual remedies, you know, more or less successfully, it's sad that I think music, like as an act itself, it's almost onomatopoetic about the collective, right? And you can't be a musician without a person to feel or hear you. You can't be an artist without that. Like, these things are really, really important to reclaim.
And that's kind of, I think, what you guys were talking about with the changes in technology, right? Like, I can record a record by myself, which I did. And lockdown happened, and fucking I was telling, I don't remember who I was telling. I was like, the whole reason the podcast happened was because I had an idea on the tour in 2019 that I had before that to do something while we weren't touring, and I got laughed at by my band. They're like, that's dumb. Who the hell wants to hear a musician talk about anything other than like drug stories?
That's kind of yeah.
You know, so I was like, no, we're gonna do this thing, and it's gonna be like, they're like, yeah, what, you can do that, and here I am.
Do you guys think music is radicalizing? Can it be? Is it good for it to be?
Look, Dead Kennedys, even some of the early metal shit radicalized me. I would have never known who Pol Pot was if it wasn't for Jello Biafra. Right? I would have never known a lot of shit if it wasn't for Public Enemy. So yeah, there's definitely a rat for me. It radicalized me, and it radicalized a lot of people. Joshua Kahn Russell, who I think has been on Jacobin before, and I know, David, you know him. He actually lives around here. We talk about how punk and hardcore definitely radicalized us and made us turn that hard left. Can it do it now? The thing about music now is it's just so freaking siloed. Before, you had MTV, whether you liked MTV or not, that's how you got your music, or the radio, or
you got exposed.
Now it's like, if I want to listen to polka, funk, rap, country, well, there's a guy that'll do it, and I'll have a Spotify station for it.
And I wanted to mention too, and I want to get to the radical question as well, but just like on that, you know, it is interesting that we do have these catalogs, you know, of access to so much different kind of music. And even if you do, like, you know, let's say on Spotify, like your Discover Weekly, or you go down to any of these tools, it's all curated, and they bring people to listen to the same kinds of music. I'm sure everybody has had that experience where you're like, man, I heard this awesome, like, jazz, you know, like African jazz song that's like so cool and like unique, and then you hear your friends playing it because they got this exact same suggestion.
The algorithm.
Well, they got in trouble for some payola too, for some of those curated playlists on Spotify. So it goes back to, how do I get access? Like, how does your album, like, I'm not joking, I recorded this record and I thought we were going to tour on it, and we're not going to tour on it because the world still isn't opened up. And so a good friend of mine who does the artwork for my show and artwork on a lot of other bigger records goes, I'm going to do the artwork for you for free, and I want you to release this record. I was like, I don't know how to release a record, and to me, it's like a fart in the wind. Like, who's really going to care? Like, I'm gonna put it out like in May or whatever, but it's like, I can't go out, and the connection that people are going to have to it isn't going to be the same. Than if we went to the show and like experienced it, right?
Yeah, it's the same with, you know, all of these venues that are suffering from COVID. And, you know, this was happening before for independently owned venues because of gentrification, and, you know, private real estate kind of buying up and replanning neighborhoods,
and consolidation from the very large production companies, you know, AEG, Golden Voice, you might know them as Golden Voice, people that do Coachella. They were buying a lot of the smaller venues because they wanted to control the artists from the 200 seat room to the 1500 seat room to the 5,000 seater. And then by the time Coachella gets there, then they're not going to ask for $5 million because you were overpaying in all the small rooms. And also it's a way for you to control independent music for the most part.
You know, monopolies are really really great.
It's a real thing. And as we're, you know, and
for certain companies.
And in a place as storied as the Bay Area, with these music venues that have been around for decades, that have just hosted so many great artists that you see have to shut their doors, be it through the COVID lockdown, or just like you said, through just basic gentrification. There was a great like divey metal spot we had in San Francisco, which is like the only cool divey metal spot left in San Francisco, and now it's apartments.
Yeah.
And I know David sees that in Austin everywhere. I'm sure walking down the street is not the same as it was 10 years ago.
No, man. I mean, I was laughing. I've been showing my girlfriend's family around Austin, and I was pointing some places that are like once like now a Sweet Green, like that upscale.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that used to be a gun store when I was a kid. Stuff like that. No, I mean, it's definitely something that you have to have the community protect. And like in a social society, that would be something that we would just want to have places to listen to music in your community. I think like music can definitely radicalize folks. It can introduce you to new ideas. I mean, it has a radical potential because it can really open you up. Not just like to other concepts, but like to other people. We have, you know, we all love music here. Both as like a listener, to be in a room with people, and sometimes like, you know, you'll go to a place and you'll see everybody, it's like, man, everyone does not seem like we come from the same place, same walks of life, but then the music starts and everybody's feeling it. That's really incredible. I will say one of the most transcendent human moments, you know, that I've ever had is just jamming with a large group of people. And you're just like, it's something you feel like is complete chaos, but then, oh man, we're all able to speak this kind of language. It's like not even, you know, it's not words or anything like that. It's just like it's just something deep in our soul that we understand. Yeah. Sounds mean something important to all of us. Like those kind of like human experiences with our kind of politics, I think are quite radical. I like music that can be political. Don't get me wrong. Like I talk about, you know, I was talking about some of my favorite lyrics from, you know, old outlaw country records. I don't like it when bands are like we're only doing. I think we talked about this, Jason.
Like Rage. Yeah.
No, I don't. Again, I'm not even saying anything about like Rage or any band. Like this is not a general rule, but it's like some people, they do music, especially like socialists, and they're like, we're just gonna like tell you the slogans of the things that you already believe, and it's like, man, you gotta make the music, man. No, it's like you can do that, but like if you bring me in with the music, then that's a good thing.
Just you like know,
people send me country artists all the time who are just like, we're progressive and we're gonna like just sing a song about, you know, progressive values. It's like, man, I don't think this music is very good. Like I agree with you. Like that country music, right? And I don't find it to be very interesting just because it's country and you're talking about.
There's some. I won't name any. There's some people that definitely rub me the wrong way because I bought into some of their slogans, and then actually getting to know them, it was just they found a market.
Yeah.
And it kind of blew me away that I was like, that's the mark. Well, I mean, you're getting paid. Like I'm here at these shows and there's motherfuckers here. But
yeah, you know, I think the kind of political thrust, I really hate the like overly didactic.
Yeah.
It just comes off as a little bit stale and sometimes heartless, even though it's like very fervent and maybe potentially naive, but in any case, other people love the didactic stuff. I think the radical potential of music is what you were describing, David, and what you were describing, Jason, like the ability, I mean, this sounds corny, but it's the ability to connect people. Yeah. It's the ability to, like, you think of a city like New Orleans where people were absolutely gutted. It's very, very difficult to access public services there. They have a homelessness issue. The housing stock is unsafe for a lot of people. There's extreme precarity, but they will not let you take those instruments out of those kids' hands. That shouldn't be the ceiling, but it's a great floor to have, to say all human beings have the right to creative expression, and all human beings have the right to investment in that and resources for that. That I think is the real radical lesson that we can take with music.
And so I worked in the Gulf of Mexico for a little bit, and off the coast of Louisiana. And what blew me away was the fact that music was so entrenched in the culture. So being around young kids that are playing like washboards and shit like that, and they care about Cajun music
Which is
learning
cool
to play the
for people who haven't
accordion.
listened to it before.
Say again.
It's cool. Cajun music is cool as hell. If
It
you haven't
is.
listened to it
Well,
before.
I stayed at a hostel that ended up being a music venue. I didn't know it was a music venue until one day I went to go do my laundry. I was like, "What is that sound?"
Something about you in your life,
Blue
you
Moon
only
Saloon.
live in music venues. You're like,
Ariella, if the world ever opens up and you want to come to California, I will show you and your family a very interesting life that I've led. David, that invite, of course, is open to you as well. But there's something about it being baked into the culture there that kind of blew me away and made me fall in love, especially with Southern Louisiana. It's so absent here that the amount of work that we're going to have to do to try to get this stuff back into the culture, because it is sad that these my office is the office, so I get to be privy to certain conversations. And when you hear people like, look, these techno festivals is where we're making all this money, then that's the music that people are going to push. So how do we get instruments in the hands of young people so they can be the next thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna take on. It's honestly just is going to take seriously political movements, and I love so much of what we've been able to do with like the Bernie Sanders campaign, and these social movements of getting ideas like, if you're working, you shouldn't be living in poverty. Actually, you know what? Everyone deserves healthcare. All these things, right? These bread and butter issues are great, but as the line goes, like, we need our roses too, right? Like, we also need to make a big part of our platform that, hey, the socialists aren't just saying we want to make sure that everybody is like fed and housed and all that stuff. That's great, but we actually have a very nice vision of society where we're able to listen to music and like go out and enjoy our lives. Like, we're not just saying we want to stop everything bad that's happening. We're also saying that we want to create a lot of good in the future too. And I think that's the connection we have to build.
Yep. I think Bhaskar always says socialists aren't coming to take your Kenny Loggins records. We're trying to give you more Logginses.
Hell yeah.
Logginses for all. Bread and roses and Logginses for all.
Hell yeah.
Kenny Loggins has a song with Michael McDonald.
I love Michael McDonald. I genuinely love Michael McDonald.
Hell yeah, man.
I don't know if you know the young guy, Ariella Thundercat.
No.
I'm old, so everybody's a young guy to me. So you can imagine how I am at Coachella. Like, put some clothes on, young lady. Your parents will be, what are you wearing?
Kale knows who you're talking about. He just slid into the DMs to say that.
Okay. So
He knows.
Came out Coachella one year with Kenny Loggins and Michael McDonald because he has a song with them.
Yes, I will listen to that.
If you could have seen the look on those kids' faces, I want to say that was the year Beyonce was there.
Oh man!
So there was just, it was a lot of people.
I'll always love Michael McDonald.
Listen to that song, Michael McDonald, Kenny Loggins, and Thundercat.
I absolutely will. I think there's some promising things, right? Even when we're talking about the changes that technology has wrought for the industry, what capitalism does is this kind of pseudo-democratic bait and switch, or pseudo-meritocratic bait and switch, right? So you get these stories of like Justin Bieber or Lil Nas X, kind of coming up through. My poor dog is crying in the background. Sorry, everyone. It's because he hates Bieber. No, I'm just kidding. But you get these stories, Taylor Swift even, where it's like they were a YouTube star, right? They learned this craft on their own. They presented themselves to the world and they were so good and everyone embraced them. And like, they're all very talented. So I am not saying that they weren't embraced from their talent, but what it does is the same kind of story that you get a lot in the US, the bootstrap story, the I did it on my own story, rather than saying we could create a system where things are shareable, resources are easily available, people have access. You can just tap into a stream and see a band you've never seen before, go down the street to a new music venue or coffee house nights, talent shows, things like that. What it does is it kind of tells you that the commodification of these forms and the increased commercialization and financialization are founded on this meritocratic impulse that's just lifting these people naturally to the top. And that's why I think it's important when you see a person like Taylor Swift be like, people are selling my handwriting.
Yeah.
Right. And I have no control over who buys it.
Well, let me ask you this.
To that myth.
Well, let me ask you this, Ariella, and I'm not saying this to try to start some sort of fight with you. How do you feel then about Metallica pushing back on Napster in the early years? Because that was their beef with Napster. People are selling our music. Somebody got demos of stuff that we're not ready to release yet.
Yeah. And
why are you? Because they're still
I forgot about
pariahs.
Yeah. No, I think
in the eyes of a lot of people, you rich MFers, you guys.
Because people didn't understand that, so you have a union like the Writers Guild or the Screen Actors Guild. People in those unions are millionaires, right? But they down to the member say, I have good health care for my family because of the union. Right. So it's not necessarily always about if a person is really wealthy. And listen, if Taylor Swift, managed this issue by saying, I'm going to start my own record company, my own streaming service, and then do the same things to every single person who uses that, that's a problem. But if you have an extremely wealthy person who has the platform and can join the right fight, that's good. We should
Didn't she end up getting a deal with
she got a Spotify deal. Yeah. She did.
Look,
what she said was meant to benefit other artists and so on. But the other thing is, like, it's really not about the individuals themselves, right? It's about their relationship to the power structure, their relationship to capital. So, like Taylor Swift is fine. She has several houses and she's extremely rich and successful. She's good. But solidarity is about risk sharing. Unionization is about risk sharing. It's not just about building power. The risk that these individuals face is actually mitigated by them joining with people way down the rungs. And it's in their self-interest to do that. And that should be the point. Like, beyond the kind of flowery language of solidarity, which I'm into, human beings are emotional and social. I think we should embrace this. But beyond that, it's like, you have a self-interest in joining up with these people. You are more powerful. Your interests will be more protected. If you have a person who spent the last 50 years fighting contract battles, you're going to have a very different strategy than if you're, hiring an industry lawyer privately, right? If you are saying, listen, all of us are worried about these streaming residuals, it is going to be a very different fight than one of you being worried about it. And this is why I included Lauryn Hill in my segment, because she got trashed. She got trashed for withdrawing from something that she really felt threatened by and didn't feel she had control over. And it was at the height of her career. She's still so influential.
I mean, Lauryn Hill. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, part of the concerns that she was raising are similar to, the fight that Metallica was gesturing towards, the fight that now Taylor Swift has taken up. These artists are continually talking about the conditions in which they produce their music and the terms of those things. And to sensationalize the fight, we'll sell papers or get clicks, but really, as socialists, we should be thinking about the material foundations of those critiques, I think.
It's interesting because, again, we can't stress it enough. A lot of these guys have been very quiet, had terrestrial radio stayed, streaming not taken over, and they would have been getting those large 7-figure checks, especially people like Taylor Swift. Does it feel like she said all that to position herself to get a certain deal with Spotify? I don't know. I don't know her personally. I actually have a really good friend that used to engineer in Nashville. That did work on a couple of her records and has nothing but good things to say about her, which made me mad when he told me that.
Nice. Yeah.
But again, as a smaller independent artist, streaming for me, the goal for me would be to be on a curated playlist.
Yeah, for sure.
The goal for me would be to I used to have a PR person. That shit costed $750 a month. To have someone that has a bigger name on their roster say, if you want to write about swans, then listen to this record from this asshole, and please give us a review of this asshole. Please make it mildly favorable. And that's how a lot of people get on. And also there's like a class component to a lot of these people that we see big. I'm a huge fan of Guns N' Roses. Love the first record. Not too fond of the second one where he's dropping the N-bombs. Anyway. First, didn't know that Slash's mom was in, and his dad were in Hollywood and the music industry. He knew David Geffen.
Blue Ivy won a Grammy. It's like extreme. The nepotism is unbelievable.
But that goes into your thing about the story of people making it, because when you hear about Guns N' Roses, you could Google Guns N' Roses right now, and there's going to be some story about them living on Sunset Strip, living off strippers, drugs, booze, and the like. You're not going to hear the story of Slash saying, I had a pretty idyllic life. Grew up in LA. My mom was in Hollywood. My dad made album covers. And when I had a band, I invited David Geffen over to check out my demo.
Yeah. And I went to high school with, the most influential people's kids and so on and so forth. There's a lot of that.
But didn't you go to school with Lenny Kravitz? Like real talk.
Yeah.
That's a light-skinned power couple right there. Those are two of the most badass guitar player, rock and roll MFers around. And so it's what I'm saying is, it's really hard when you really start to look at people's stories, like who is really coming up. That's why when David's talking about country music, especially old country music, because new country music, that shit sounds like badass hip hop.
Oh, dude, that stuff's a whole thing, by the way. The snap track, it's like one of the worst. I don't know, just like, first of all, like, it's not a music that traditionally has like a beat like that, and it's really bad. It's like, you're right. It's like 90s. It's like bad 90s, like R&B hip hop, but sung by like a super like souped up bro from Georgia.
Yeah,
it's
and
sung by a dude.
It's terrible. It's also
that
very
doesn't like black people but loves hip hop.
It's like written by a computer that was just fed like a certain demographics Twitter streams where it's like booze, guns. It's like, just it doesn't
America.
Like,
Oh man,
so there was like a really bad movement in like the mid 2000s, which was, to be fair, it was a very bad time, just I think in culture in general in this country. But they had this thing called like hip hop. And it was on CMT all the time, and it was very goofy. But honestly, like that stuff at least has more soul than the snap track stuff, because at least it's just like some weird guy from like Virginia, and he's just like, I like rap, but I also am a hick, so I'm gonna rap about driving my truck around or whatever. Like at least that's a little authentic versus these guys who feel like they're all like they're all clones or something. They're created in the lab.
Yeah, I feel like it's just a computer that's like, your name is like Jetty McGuffin, and you're gonna be singing about how you like tractors. This woman left. You saw this hot woman at a bar. It's like they have to hit.
And they're crying too. They're always crying.
Junk food, though. It's junk food music.
It's junk food, but
music
like,
should feed you. It's junk food.
You're missing out on like all these great folks. Just for people, like there's a great YouTube channel called like Gems on VHS, and I don't know too much about the organization, but they basically do like very professional quality videos for like upcoming young country and folk artists, and it's legit, real deal, good music. But it's something you would never find through Spotify or for anything like that, right? And like that's another thing about technology is it does allow like communities to exist, but just like anything new technology in capitalism, it just gets cannibalized and monopoly.
And that's what the radio was before.
The radio is crazy too. Sorry, not to go on, but like, the radio, we're talking about like, technology, like, the radio had the same issue where the DJs had insane amounts of power, right? They would, and I know in like country music, especially like in the 50s and stuff, they would just straight up be like, I don't like this son of a bitch. Like, I'm never going to play him on my station again, just because, he heard something about him at a party. Or he's a commie, more likely than anything. So these issues have always existed. It's just like, and that's why I've been trying to make sure it's like, let's not fall into the trap of, blaming tools and make, the point that we're talking about systems that use these tools in a certain way, and these tools get developed in a certain way to promote this one system.
Oh man, like I said, I sat in my room during COVID lockdown and recorded an entire record and played a bunch of instruments at all hours of the night. And definitely used computerized drums on a lot of that shit. So I'm not gonna sit here and fucking bag it.
Yeah.
Fuck, you were saying about country that I wanted to chime in on.
You have a country song to debut right now.
I do not have a country song because I will not destroy that genre like that. And Working Stagecoach destroyed me.
Booze, Guns, and Bars.
Hell yeah,
I
like
Austin.
Austin, dude. Look, David, I know you're a Texan through and through, and you like UT. And for those of you that don't know, David and I'll say this, David, we are sports fans.
Yes, we are.
And college football rolls
everybody,
around.
please, forgive us.
We talk shit to each other on Twitter, and the fact that we can have these shit talk conversations on open Twitter and no one comment on it is rather funny.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, like, not to derail, but Jason and I started to talk because I tweeted one day, it's like every time I tweet like just anything remotely about football, I'll lose like 20 followers on Twitter. Because there's so many lefties who just like are so against like sports, like in general, beyond just like not liking them, like getting mad at people for enjoying them.
So we definitely go back and forth. Look, my first time in Austin, I remember setting up and I had my shit and we set up our shit and I turned my amp on. Instead of turning it on, everybody left. I was like, man, fuck this town. And like the next time I went there, I wasn't cool enough. And I was like, double fuck this town. And then and then I went there a third time because I'm a glutton for punishment. And I started to meet some good people and they showed me that, hey, everything here doesn't suck. And we started making it a definite tour stop city in Texas. But I will say the shows were always better in San Antonio.
San Antonio's a cool town.
San Antonio is definitely a cool town.
It's gonna start some weird like San Antonio versus Austin.
I mean,
in the comments.
Oh, I would love somebody
that they can do what they're gonna do.
It's oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, carry on.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I actually need to end the show. It's been super fun talking to you, but I have to put my kids to bed.
Oh, it's late where you are, huh?
Late where I am. Yeah. Oh. I'm not on the Pacific Standard Time schedule.
Okay. That means I have to go pick up mine. I have a 2-year-old.
Oh, you do. I have a 3-year-old. They're very cute.
You feel left out.
Oh, that's fine. I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it because you need to have a kid, David. I look at me. I'm way too old to be changing diapers. I stopped changing diapers in the 90s, and then I decided,
and then you just jumped back in.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, why not? I wanted to thank both of you. I feel like I could keep talking about this forever. David, thank you so much for guest hosting. Jason, thank you for a riveting conversation. I hope it continues. Everybody check out their respective podcasts. And Jason's, when you're going to drop your album in May? Your
sure.
COVID album?
Sure. I don't know, man. I was sitting there. I was like, should I drop it in May when Ben Burgess drops his book and I could like piggyback on him?
Yeah.
Like Ben Burgess, you really won't like this.
You can open for every book event he does without telling him.
I look forward to the world opening back up so I can like see people like you guys in real life, and
for sure.
Yeah, we'll do your venues that Jason has lived in, tour of America. All right. Well, thanks again so much. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. If you did, like and subscribe at Paul on Twitter, because I don't even know if we have a Twitter. Do other things for us on social media, like Facebook. I don't know. Follow us on Facebook. I'm hopeless, you guys. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. You're unplugged. That means that
Hale's
you probably
gonna
have
text
nice
me after the show and be like,
"No,
why? Yeah. Thank you both again, and we'll have you back on soon.
Nice to meet you. Oh, I want to get you on my show one of these Saturdays.
Yeah, let's check in about it. Nobody can tell. This is the first time I've announced that you guys are here for our Jacobin Show first. I'm extremely pregnant right now. You can't see. That's why I have to write out everything I say, because pregnancy brain is real. That's also why I look tired, people in the comments. But I'd love to be on your show, pending, all of the pregnancy symptoms I have. I would really enjoy that.
Mine runs in all the time and kicks the door in. And it's very cute.
Yeah, as long as you can cope with me having no breath support and potentially forgetting things. I think
is it a big child? Are the other ones?
Yeah, the other ones. Yep.
The big children.
Yeah.
You have multiple children.
I do. Yeah, I have 2 kids. So I knew what I was in for. I'm not too worried about it.
You're going for the trifecta.
My mom's side of the family is extremely tall. I didn't get the tall side, but my mom's side is like 6. My mom's 6 feet tall, and my siblings are very tall. I'm small. I got the small side, the Richmond, Virginia genes, which are all like around 5'5" at the tallest.
So are your children? Are they?
My
little?
children got the tall Swedish.
So you're
Yeah.
grown.
My mom would always be like, I never was uncomfortable, and I meditated through my labors. And I was like, you're about a foot bigger than me. Maybe that's why. Yeah. So now all of the people in the comments know my secret. I've been hiding it from the head down.
TV when Claire Huxtable was pregnant and there was just groceries.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually holding a huge purse filled with flowers and like a watermelon.
Well, congratulations on your pregnancy, and I hope everything goes well and your feet don't swell and you're not uncomfortable sleeping at night. And
the good thing is I get a lot of feedback at this moment from this baby kicking at certain times while you guys are talking.
Oh, word?
There's certain stuff like the NOLA stuff. Loved it.
Oh, he was good. Hey, well,
that's good.
Over there.
Loved the drug den comment. Loved the Chris Christopherson stuff.
I love it.
I have to tell David Griscom this Chris Christopherson story off camera then.
Okay, well, we'll let you go then. But thank you again, both of you, for being on the show, and we'll have you back on soon. And to the audience, good night.